let's go to Steve Berkson. Steve Berkson, this is a teaching from Steve Berkson. This is during a Q&A that he did. And during the Q&A, he addresses the question, was the Last Supper a Passover Seder? Here we go.
Let's also understand that the lamb gets killed first, and then you eat the meal. Okay.
By the way, I like this guy because he sounds like the comedian Carlin. You know, Carlin?
We also know and should know that Yeshua is our Passover. We've read those verses, right? Yeshua, our Passover, who was sacrificed for us. So in order to fulfill everything, can we all agree that he was killed at the right time when the lambs are being slaughtered in the temple? Is that a stretch? Okay. So we can agree on that. Can we also agree that I may be strange in this, maybe you're different, but generally speaking, I like to eat my meal and my animal after it's killed? Okay? I don't know about you, but normally do you like to eat your animal before or after you kill it? So the meal has to come after you kill the animal. So here's a meal that Yeshua is eating, and he doesn't die until 3 in the afternoon the next day. Or let's not get bogged down in days. It's still the 15th. But later when the sun comes up in the afternoon, he's going to be killed a lot of hours after this meal. And so he's killed right when the lambs are supposed to be killed. How in the world is he eating the Passover meal before the Passover is even killed? He can't be. You can't be the meal and eat the meal. Yeshua couldn't do that. That's why he said, look, with great desire, I've desired to eat this meal with you, but I can't be the lamb and eat the meal.
Okay, so everybody that is taking this position has the idea that there's a lamb that is slaughtered, that then roasted, and then the meat from that lamb is eaten at the beginning of Passover, or the beginning of the 15th, or the end of the 14th and the beginning of the 15th of the month, and that's it. That's what you eat. That's the meat you eat. All right. So, for instance, and this is where I'm just going to give you 2 verses that is the crux of this. John 18:28. Then they led Yeshua from Caiaphas into the praetorium, and it was early. So we know it's the morning after he had eaten the evening before, what we have in the Gospels. He had eaten this meal together with his disciples. And it says they led him into the praetorium, and it was early, and they themselves did not enter into the praetorium so that they would not be defiled, but might eat the Passover. Now, who are the they? If they came from Caiaphas's house, we have every reason to believe that at least some of them were priests. All right? And we recognize that the priests were the ones, Caiaphas being, I think, at this point an honorary kind of retired, but still very much part of the deciding factor in terms of the priestly issues. And so they might eat the Passover. Now, let's collate that with Deuteronomy 16, verse 2. This is part of the Torah commandments regarding the Passover. You shall sacrifice the Passover to the Lord, to Adonai your God, from the flock and the herd, in the place where Adonai chooses to establish his name. What do you mean? From the flock and from the herd. Okay? So what we see here is that it's not talking just about one sacrifice. The lamb is from the flock, all right? And so what is the herd? Well, if you read the whole Torah injunctions with regard to the week of Pesach, you know that every day of the Pesach week, there are sacrifices given, extra sacrifices every day. Some of those are from the flock and others are from the herd. Did the priests have the right to take some of that and eat it? Yes, they did. These were like fellowship offerings. Okay, so from everything that we can see, the priests who were on duty, and again, we have limited historical data, but it would only make sense that there would be a great number of priests on duty during the week of Pesach, particularly at the beginning of the week, because there were so many lambs that needed to be slaughtered in the temple, and then taken and roasted for the meal. That meant that these many priests who were on duty were also getting paid, as it were, by the food that they would take from the sacrifices throughout the week. So it's both and. Did Yeshua and his disciples eat a Passover meal? Absolutely. What was it then that those who were with Caiaphas said they did not want to enter the praetorium, which would make them unclean, because there were times in the praetorium where they actually executed people there, or at least they shed blood there, and so forth and so on. And besides that, it was ruled and controlled by Gentiles, and so it was presumed that there was uncleanness there. They didn't want to go there and become defiled. If they had been defiled by any kind of corpse, it would have knocked them out of any service for the whole week.
Okay, so let me let me recap and see if I can condense what you just said and if I got it right. So what you're saying is they didn't want to go into the Praetorium because the continued sacrifices throughout the Passover week were still referred to as the Passover.
It must be, because in Deuteronomy 16:2 it says, "You shall sacrifice the Passover to the Lord your God from the flock."
And if you continue on to verse 3, Lo tuchal alav chametz, shivat yamim tochal alav. You shall eat it for 7 days.
Yeah.
And you shall eat
right
the Pesach. So yeah, there's the language can stretch.
The it must refer to the Passover in the previous verse.
Another point is here, Tim. Talk a little bit about the logistics of a throng of pious Jews who've come from all over the land and presumably from the diaspora to Jerusalem to select a lamb, etc., and to have it slaughtered and roasted so that they could eat it. Is everybody simultaneously eating the same meal?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because, as you know, even the Mishnah tries to figure out how to do this, and they come up with a very ingenious way of having 300 priests acting at the same time. The logistics are, Josephus tells us that the brook Kidron ran as though it were a river of blood or water of blood, and he even says up to the bridles of the horses. So he's trying to use a depth of blood that is typical by way of a metaphor. So there was so much going on. So you're right. But let me say one more thing. The idea that Yeshua has to be crucified at the same time that the Passover lamb, the ones that people were going to eat, has to be crucified at the same time in order to be the Passover lamb, then what do we do about Yom Kippur? Was Yeshua not the sacrifice of the Yom Kippur? The writer to the Hebrews thinks he was. The writer to the Hebrews doesn't even consider Passover as the primary holiday. He's talking about Yom Kippur. He's talking about when the high priest goes into the most holy place. And he says that this is all about Yeshua. Well, how could Yeshua be the sacrifice as well as the intercessory priest when he was crucified at the week of Passover and not during the time of Yom Kippur? The idea that you have to have it at the same time in order to work isn't the case at all. So, and I think, of course, this informs when he says, unless you eat my flesh and drink my blood, he's talking about the blood of grapes. And he's talking about his flesh as that which was the Passover lamb was eaten. And so, unless you recognize me as the Passover lamb, as the one to whom all of the Passover lambs throughout the millennia have pointed, you won't have any part in me. You have to accept me as that sacrifice to which all of these pointed. It doesn't have to be at the same hour and exactly the same time.
I've heard that same reasoning, a similar reasoning to the insistence that Yeshua has to die at the same time, as if all the lambs were slaughtered at the same time simultaneously, that he had to die at the same time. But I've heard that with respect to eschatology and the fall feast, that it's going to be on Yom HaTeruah is when the great trumpet will sound.
Hang on just a sec, because what you just said, Dad, about how the continued sacrifices throughout Passover are considered the Passover.
Right.
So if he was crucified on the 15th, on the Shabbat of the 15th, which is the first day of Passover, then then the sacrifice, I mean, if you want to take the logic that he has to be the Passover sacrifice, then technically speaking, he was crucified within the 7-day period, making him the Passover.
Right. And moreover, on the 15th of the month, which is the first day of unleavened bread, okay, and we can talk about that, because actually in the first century, they said they used the first day of unleavened bread to be of the 14th and the 15th. Now, the 14th, the preparation day, wasn't a Sabbath. The 15th was. So on the 15th of the month, there were not only sacrifices for the Passover, but there were also additional sacrifices because it was a festival Sabbath. So there were many more sacrifices offered at the temple for that festival day than they would have the next day and the following day until the seventh day, when you also had the seventh day was also a festival Sabbath.